Classical literature, the stories that have inspired the foundation of all the stories that we have today. These stories have such inherent value to the reading world as we know it, that it would be stupid to read one and completely renounce all of its value and quality. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I was wrong. Okay, so to those of you who have not been here for the whole time that I've been making videos, which is probably most of you, then you may not know that for quite a long time, if you asked me what my least favourite book was, I would go Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Yep, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I even made a video about it, which I won't link anywhere because I don't want you to watch it, and I'm not going to take it down, but I can guarantee that I sound quite stupid in it, so I don't want you to see it. But I reread Frankenstein recently because one of my friends was starting to read it and really liked it and was like, your opinions are bad, Frank. And I was like, well, I'm not having that. So I said, I'm going to reread Frankenstein so that I can have a valid argument against this horrible person and, justify my inherently wrong opinion. And the inevitable happened, and I realised that I was, in fact, wrong in every account. And this has happened with me quite a lot recently, actually, because I don't like Nightmare Before Christmas, and I've rewatched it twice, and still I'm not a big fan of it, although I'm probably going to rewatch it this year, and I'm going to love it, and I'm going to realise what a pillock I've looked like. I didn't like Alien when I first saw it 2 weeks ago. I rewatched it yesterday, and I really liked it. So, I am actually, right now, probably not the best person to be running a review channel, but here we are, and that's a tangent. We're going to talk about Frankenstein and why this is, in fact, not the worst book I have ever written. So, this is going to be kind of a discussion review. I'm not going to have positives or negatives. This is just going to be an all-encompassing conversation about what I thought about this book and how my opinions changed from last time. So, to give you a bit of background, when I first read it, I thought this book was boring, that it waffled, that it repeated itself too much, and that just in general was poorly written. I repeat, I was a numpty. Now, I thought this because for long periods of the story, Frankenstein, or the monster he creates, would dwell on their misfortunes and how cruel life is and how cruel the cards that have been dealt are. And I'd be like, I get it, you're miserable, that makes sense, but stop telling me and move on. And now, I guess I'm older and more of a connoisseur when it comes to reading. I appreciate how well written all of the bits where they're monologuing to themselves about how cruel life is as different and really well written. I didn't realise how miserable it made me feel reading this. I felt, grim and hopeless when I was reading these bits. And so, point number one, I was wrong there. I also thought that there weren't really any distinct characters and that they all talk the same, and that's because the problem with authors that have been dead for quite a few centuries is that they have this chronic illness known as speaking in the lingo that was common at the time. So of course they're all going to speak in this and this is what's common for writing as well. So of course they're going to speak in this quite, flowery way, because that's what happened then, and that's not because the book's bad, it's just because that's how life was, and I should have just accepted that. So that's point number two, I was wrong. And those are the only two that I can think of right now, but I'm sure as I get through the review, I'll find other things that show how incredibly stupid I am, and share them with you all. Before I go any further, spoilers for Frankenstein, although this book is 200 years old, so can it really be called a spoiler anymore? So, I've got my notes. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, according to my notes, is the emotions this made me feel. Because I remember the first time I read it, the main emotion I remember feeling was boredom. And I did occasionally feel bored when reading this, but that's just because Gothic, I don't think, is my my particular genre that I enjoy. But that's why I don't think I enjoyed this book very much the first time, and why I felt bored sometimes now is because there is a lot of commitment to the psychology and sharing emotions, and that's just how the story is being told. And I definitely enjoyed it a lot more than last time, but I felt bored sometimes. But that's irrelevant, because what I wanted to say, which was a good thing, was this book made me feel a lot more this time than it did last time. And this might be because I took time to notice it. When I was reading the sad bits, I was like, oh, I am feeling pretty glum. Or when because I actually read the whole book this time, the last time I DNF'd it, when some of the later tragedies happened, when Frankenstein's newlywed wife Elizabeth gets murdered by the monster, in the moment where Frankenstein realises that the monster, because the monster made a threat to Frankenstein previously, I will be with you on your wedding night, and for the whole time Frankenstein was like, oh, he's going to kill me, and I knew Elizabeth was going to die, so I was like, you numpty, he's going to kill your wife. But, he didn't realise that. He didn't even consider that the monster would go for anyone but him, because he decided that was what the monster wanted, his eventual death. And so when he hears when he hears Elizabeth screaming from the room that he put her in to hide her, so in case the monster showed up, and his heart dropped, my heart dropped with him, even though I knew it was coming, because that is just such a major moment for him, like him realising how wrong he was, and that his most valued person left alive, because quite a few people he's cared about have died now, has just been viciously torn away from him. And I felt it, I was sad, I had tears in my eyes, and I don't want to admit that for the book that I said was my least favourite book, now made me feel more than some recent books have, and it's infuriating, because I don't like being wrong, but God, how wrong I was here. We'll go, and yet again, this was another thing that turned me off the first time. There's a character called Justine who's on trial for murdering a child that the monster actually murdered and framed Justine, and Frankenstein has realised this, and so he's sitting there watching her get condemned to death for a crime she didn't commit, and he's like, oh, if only I could say the truth, but surely I would be condemned as a madman. And I'm like, yes, you would, but there's also the slim possibility that perhaps it could lead somewhere. And I know that's probably me just being optimistic, and that it's actually not an option for him to say, hey, this, because it would probably result in him getting locked up as well. But the thing is that he doesn't know for sure, and he's going on what's best for him, it feels like. So Frankenstein is a very selfish character, and so I was like, yeah, just you could, but you won't, and it makes sense, but it also, I feel that, you're not trying as much as you could to stop this from happening, and it was so frustrating, but Frankenstein was frustrated too, and so I was feeling, yet again, what he was feeling, and so that's just, yet again, an example of how much this book made me feel, and when I didn't really realise it. So when I said that characters weren't very distinct, the characters of the monster and Frankenstein are such brilliant characters. Now, they wrote character different back in the day, I guess, because this is obviously very different to how perhaps Stephen King would write a person. It's like you get, Stephen King is definitely a lot more in depth in the way he writes characters. You get their POV, you get all this. I couldn't possibly say how Stephen King pulls it off, but he does pull it off, and it's a lot more personal. Whereas I've not read many classic books, but in the one I have, it's always felt a bit more impersonal. But you got so much from these characters, despite the fact that I felt like I wasn't really getting into their head too much. Because of course it's told by Frankenstein, but he is an unreliable narrator. And it took me a while to realise this, because he is, I suppose, framing, and this is my speculation, I don't know Shelley's intention when she wrote Frankenstein. She might have wanted him to be, actually a really great guy. And that's definitely how he's telling his story. He wants to paint himself as the tragic hero. Although you can tell from what's going on that he is kind of far from being a hero. Definitely tragic, but is he a great man? Not really. And so those are great things about his character that were put in there that I just didn't pick up on last time, because I reiterate, I was dumb. And the monster as well. The monster was so great, not just because of who he is, but of what he represents, of the messages he's bringing of responsibility between creator and creation, and his whole deal about morality and moral responsibility. All the questions he comes forth with, all of the things he represents are so amazing, and I really like it. And I didn't expect myself to get so happy talking about this book, which I want to hate so much, but I don't. So yeah, the monster is so great as a point of debate, as well as just an interesting character of this thing that has been born and thrown out into the world and taught itself all things about life while being shunned by society and realizing that it perhaps is not human, and it perhaps is not even it's not going to ever fit in with people, but still wanting to be good and being turned away so that its want for good is replaced with want for blood. And oh, it's so good. And later on in the book, and in the final section of the book, this is a bit, the book, the way what the story actually is makes me laugh. It's a letter from a guy describing the story that he was told to by another guy, and in the middle, it's a story that was told to the guy who was telling the story, and it's brilliant. It's quite funny. But the monster comes onto the ship at the guy who is recording Frankenstein's story, and starts talking about how maybe Frankenstein suffered, and Frankenstein has said throughout the whole book, "No one suffers as much as I." And I hate him for that, because even though he might be right, it's very, very pompous to be like, "Nay, of all the people who have ever suffered on this green earth, I am the most tragic." And then the monster comes along in the final section of the book when Frankenstein has died, and he says, "I am the most tragic. Do you think when I did all these terrible things, did I not feel? My want for virtue and kindness were as alive in me as ever, and I was forced to go with this insatiable lust for blood while still feeling the sting of remorse, and it reframes everything that was done." And it's so brilliant. Like, that final section of the book with Frankenstein hunting down the monster, and then the monster and Frankenstein finally kind of clashing together even though one of them is dead. It's just such a great climax for the story, and so deserved, and so much more climactic than I was expecting it to be. I said earlier that Frankenstein was an unreliable narrator, and this was something I realised really later on as well. It kind of confirmed my suspicion. Now, Frankenstein, apparently, according to the guy who wrote down his story, read through what the guy had written and rewrote some of the interactions between him and the monster to make them seem more spirity, have more life behind them. And here you have the thing of the guy who has been the cause for all this horrible stuff and has condemned this innocent creature it's innocent to a point, of course, but has condemned and ferociously caused the suffering of this other being. He's gone through and rewritten what was written from those interactions, and I'm thinking, well, all the stuff I've read might just be Frankenstein's way of framing his conversations with the monster as righteous and just, because Frankenstein makes the monster's life hell. The monster says, "I want a partner, and then I'll go out into the world, and I'll leave you be." And that's a valid argument. And Frankenstein's arguments against it are also valid. But, Frankenstein is inevitably being kind of... I know the monster had killed 2 people at this point, but Frankenstein is being kind of thick-headed in not registering what the monster is saying. And I'm thinking that it might be how Frankenstein twisted it to make himself seem like the good guy, but it never rung true to me, and that might be because he never was the good guy. How much has he changed? This is just my speculation, by the way. But I'm really fascinated by this, because this is, very... it's like stuff that is still groundbreaking today when you pull this unreliable narrator stuff off, and so to think that maybe Mary Shelley pulled it off in, when was it? 1818, is mind-blowing, and so I really want to believe that all this stuff that I'm saying is true, because that would be so, so cool. Now, on the note of Frankenstein, my notes here, where Frankenstein is stupid and an arse and I hate him, and those words are true, because as I said, he's so up his own bum. The whole time he's like, "I am suffering terribly. These people have lost their family, but I am far more tragic because I know and I have the sting of remorse in my bosom," or whatever. And it's just like, mate, I know, but you're bigging yourself up. You're being like, I'm a tragic hero. And it's like, you're also an idiot. This is also all your fault, and that's part of his tragedy. But I don't know, I can't articulate it very well, but he is so incredibly pompous, I guess. There's a point where he's in prison and he's woken up from being in a swoon, because this happens quite a lot. He gets very agitated and goes through months of being kind of in and out of consciousness. And when he fully wakes up at this one point, he's being treated by a nurse, and she doesn't fawn over him and go, "Oh, you poor thing." And so he decides that he hates her for being unfeeling. And it's like, yeah. Grow up a bit, Not of course, no one's going to fawn over you. She thinks you're a murderer. She's not going to be like, you poor dear, how tough your life is. She is going to be indifferent. And so he's like, oh, this foul specimen of humanity, be gone. And she's just like, not done much wrong, really. I laughed when that happened. I was like, ha, you scumbag. I did write a quote down that I did send to this person who made me reread this, because it was another moment where I was like, Frankenstein is an arse and stupid and I hate him. And it's this moment where Elizabeth has a sense of foreboding following their marriage, and they're going to where they're going to spend their honeymoon, and she has the sense of foreboding, and obviously she's going to die, and she kind of senses that, I suppose. And the quote when Frankenstein realises this is this: I took the hand of Elizabeth. You are sorrowful, my love. Ah, if you knew what I have suffered, and what I may yet endure, you would endeavour to let me taste the quiet and freedom from despair that this one day at least permits me to enjoy. He's like, you're sad, you think you're sad, I'm really sad, so you should stop being sad to make me less sad. It's like, man, shut up! Other people are allowed to be sad too. It's not a competition between like, I'm the saddest, no, I'm the saddest. You're all your lives are miserable. And it's just, he is so pampered. And I think it's well done because he's that kind of bad person, it feels like. That you don't really realise he's a bad person, but there are hints of it. Because he seems like a good person, but he's really, like, how he views the world, how he thinks about himself, is really horrible, I think. And it's quite subtly done, to the point where I was questioning whether Mary Shelley did it by accident and wrote the biggest Mary Sue on earth, or whether she was meant to do it, and I hope she was meant to do it, because that would be really cool if she did. Another thing, before I do a small negative and then go on my merry way, Shelley wrote some certain sections of this book really well, and that's the creation of the monster, where Frankenstein is infused with this, like, really kind of this madness, this obsession with getting his work done, and she wrote it really well. This feeling of like heading headfirst to his goal and not caring about anything else was just marvellously done, and I felt it. And his want for revenge at the end, when he's like, I'm going to hunt this thing to the ends of the earth, I felt it. I felt the anger, and I didn't necessarily fully agree with Frankenstein, but I felt it every time, and it was just so brilliant. And this does remind me of a point at which I was wrong before, where Frankenstein, after making his monster, passes out and needs to be nursed back to health for about a year. And I was like, wimp. But I realise now it wasn't because he was so scared by the ugliness of the creature he created. It was because he had spent the last year not getting much sleep, not really looking after himself, doing this thing, and suddenly when he was no longer suspended by this madness, obviously everything gave way. So it makes sense now. I was done. I think, possibly, if everything that I've speculated about in this review is true, I could actually, with almost absolute certainty, say that Frankenstein may be a perfect book. Because, and let me get this across, I was listening to a podcast called Intentionally Blank earlier, and it's a very good podcast, and you should listen to it. I'll leave a link down below. They, Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells, who are the two people who run it. Brandon Sanderson is one of the most famous, if not the most famous fantasy writer right now. They were discussing what they think makes a perfect film, and they were saying that it's partially when they have an idea and they've put it off to the best that they could possibly put it off. There are other, boxes, tick boxes, that's the best way I can define it right now without thinking of the word. I want to say metrics, but I don't think it is metrics. Other things that had to be accomplished for it to be considered perfect, but that was one of the things, and I think if everything I speculated about is true, then this is the perfect execution of the idea that it was trying to get across. Even though I didn't particularly like the genre it was in, it executed all of the brooding bits so wonderfully, and how it was just, it could be a perfect book. Now, does that mean that it's one of my favourite books I've ever read? No. But this book does have a special place in my heart as being evidence of how much a person can be wrong just depending on when they consume a piece of media. And I do think it's perfect. So, that's a bit of a character arc for you there. I'll pop it here. So that is my review of Frankenstein, and thank you for listening to me probably ramble on extremely incoherently about it for the last 20 odd minutes, but I hope you did enjoy it, and I would love to hear what you think about Frankenstein, because as I said, a lot of this was speculation, and so I would love to hear if you've read it, if you know about this sort of thing, anything you know about the book, whether you have anything to contribute, because I haven't had many comments since I've stopped doing Discord things as frequently, and I am reading Sorcery right now, which should be done soon, so I'll upload that soon, but I haven't had as much interaction with the people, with my viewers, and I want to talk to you all, I want to get some conversation flowing, so if you have anything to contribute, please leave it below, and I'll look forward to talking to you all. So, I will try and upload on Sunday, or I probably won't have finished Sorcery by then. I might think up something to talk about. Alternatively, I will try and finish it by next Wednesday. But yet again, no promises. I'm going to do my best to pull out whatever I can. But until then, thank you for watching, and have a good one. Bye.